All right. One thing I'll mention is that Claire, I may be leaving on Wednesday next week. I'll get back to you.
Great. So the
So,
announcement for the recording is that we might be out for the next week or two.
okay, but I'm looking forward to, I would like to be there for Catherine's talk about Nomada, if that can be arranged. There's just a couple more things I wanted to cover, and I'm going to share, and we will go to Discover Life Guide and then go to the camera. And that is the group that we call the white CT group, includes things like sayi, illinoensis, cressonii, and there's several others. And they're very difficult to tell apart. And then when you look at the molecules, they have the similar problem that the bidentates have. They're very closely related. I'm going to, sorry, sneeze. And so let's go and work on that group a little bit, because they're very common species, just like the bidentate species, the pygmaea. So what we've done is come up with sort of general classes that are not, what should I say? They're not satisfactory, really, but it allows us to at least categorize some of the species that we're coming across that are in that white CT group without saying white CT species. So to be worked on, maybe Catherine's made some progress on it, hopefully. And I mean, you can see some differences. We'll talk about it. All right, so we go to Discover. Did I share? I don't think I did. That's why it's not working.
You have not shared. And before you go too far, could you give us a rundown of the species in the group, so we can have a little list for ourselves?
In the white CT group?
Is that what you're talking about? Which you're also calling the pygmae group, or are those separate?
No, that's a subgroup. Sorry.
Subgroup of the white CT.
White CT species include a long list of things, and there are a bunch of names we don't use at all because we are mystified as to the taxonomy of those species. One thing that we learned when looking at the molecules with Molly Reitmeyer on these was that both the bidentate group and the white CT group have the ability within a CO1 molecular clade. In other words, everything's lining up if you look on the molecule list. And they look, and then they not only do they line up, they look relatively similar if you take all the specimens out in terms of size, shape, morphology. But what doesn't look the same are the colors. And in the past, many species were essentially just described by morphology plus color. So in this case, though, morphology is the same, and the colors differ, and yet they're all lining up with the same molecular signature when we look at the mitochondrial DNA, the CO1. Now, something more sophisticated is called for, and within the this group, and there's two problematic sets of specimens with sets of names, and all these names may or may not match. So some are synonyms, some probably need to be separated out. Associations between males and females are pretty ambiguous too. And in particular, the males can go from almost completely black to almost completely red, and the maculations, i.e. the yellow markings on the abdomens and elsewhere, but mostly on the abdomens, particularly again in the males, but also the females can go from almost stripes to, I think probably in a few cases, stripes to almost nothing. In other words, they usually do retain at least spots on T2 and T3. That's the classic, is T2 is the first place, usually in Nomada, that a marking will show up. And then they start blending. So in the past, though, people saw this variation and they would claim it to be different species. And so there's a bunch of names rattling around there that are essentially what we would call on the books. So they are names that have not been subsumed by anything else, by any researcher. And so they're available to be used. But when you look at the keys and the guides, but it was pretty clear that what was going on is you were keying out a variety of taxa that are that mush together in some not particularly clear way. So we just came up with some general morphology kinds of things with, color patterns that we recognize as universal or somewhat universal to that group. And with acknowledging that within those groups, there are going to be differences. So we have a pygmaea group. These are all have white setae. So when I say white setae, and we'll show this, I'm talking about that instead of having what we saw in the previous sections where you have the white setae, same place on the apex of the hind tibia, you have, instead of the dark peg-like or thickened reddish, usually setae that are very different from the white hairs, you have a much subtler situation. The setae are still there. Again, we're going to show this. The setae are still there, but they're much more in alignment in terms of structure to the existing white hairs. When you look closely, you can see, oh, they don't really have branching, and they're ever so slightly thickened, but they're most of the time a clear white. So you transparent, translucent, similar to the hairs. So making it irritatingly difficult sometimes at first glance to see what's going on. But with our usual tricks of turning it upside down and looking for relative length, they fortunately do project out from the surrounding hairs. So, and the fact that there is nothing to go on is also illuminating. There's also a couple things on the books that theoretically have no CT, and it's difficult without the DNA work to really be sure if those are actual species, because most of them have one specimen, the type, or a couple. I think I want to say Florilegus is one of those, but I'm not sure about that. And so we're going to take a little exploration of this tranche, and we're going to hope that young taxonomists like Catherine are going to move us into a good space. I think I have a box of things called pygmaea here, and we'll move into that. And let's just start with a view from on top, and then we'll go into, yeah, this is good enough, into looking at the specimen as a whole. Any questions out there yet? Doesn't sound like it. And so this is just a very generic looking Nomada because it's common. So there, by default, it's generic. So these would be associated. Oh yeah, right. So these are things that show up in the spring usually. So I'm trying to think. I don't think any of these migrate beyond, let's say, midsummer into the fall. Bidentate or the white CT group are all spring, so almost certainly all associated with Andrena, spring Andrena, super common in woods. You can often see them, like if you're in a path in the woods, that's where sometimes Andrena like to nest. You'll just see the Nomada sort of floating around looking for nesting or nest grabbing opportunities. All right, I'm really going to share now. I think we'll go right to the microscope rather than Discover Life. People can look at Discover Life and see if they have any questions there. And this thing that you can't see out of the way. And
what species are you going to bring on deck?
This would be the pygmaea group thing. So we'll just show the CT, which are defining that it is a white CT group. And then within that group, we'll talk about why am I calling this pygmaea? And you'll see that it's not as clear as you would like because it isn't. I'm sure there's several species in there. All right, I think I have made this live. And let's go here and move this in. And I think, oh, wait a minute. It's possible I don't have the cord in the back set up. I don't. What the heck is that? That is the plug. This is, oh, it should be in there. Okay. And that's on and that's on. So oh, I am live. I just didn't realize it. All right. We will bring down the magnification. Now that's part of the problem. And we're going to look at a female. We'll look at females first here within this group. And we'll make it full screen. Apply some focus. So standard Nomada in terms of, you find these by the bucket load in the spring. They're very common. And we're seeing, oh, in the females, they're almost always red, usually with black down the center. It can be wider, it can be less wide. It doesn't seem to matter that much. And there's combinations of dark and light areas in the face and elsewhere. Patterns vary quite a bit. Most of the focus, here's the pseudopogidial area. We'll probably zoom in there so you just get a look at pseudopogidial areas, and just to note that there are differences. But the place that you see within the females, a lot of effort in descriptions has to do with the, what a lovely animal, has to do with the markings on the side. This is pretty classical, okay? So they can be smudgy. Usually it's a little clearer than this, but usually T2 and T3 are the first places to see these marks, and they're variable, but this is pretty standard. One there, about those locations. And then they expand in size and often then move into more oblong markings, and then sometimes they approach each other as if to make stripe. And every once in a while, not in this particular species group, but in a couple of the other white CT groups that are less common, the two markings will kiss right here in the middle, but you'll still see a dark line that's separating them. In other words, it's not a continuous line of yellow like you see in the things like imbricata and several other species that do have complete unbroken markings. So in the literature, they often will call this the stripe is broken in the middle, meaning that there's some kind of gap or even a like light line. Let's move in just because we're here, and we're going to look at the pseudopogidial area again. And it's not particularly, this would be, because it's so common, I'm going to change the lighting. It's by default of its commonness, the standard coloration, a little too much. Here, and let's see if I can make this big. I'll get it again. There we go. So, so here's the pseudopogidial area, and here's the pogidium of the female. And every once in a while, there's some characters here, but we essentially never use this plate. Often it's retracted and you can't see it either in terms of IDs. And even the pseudopogidial area is not commonly used because they all have one, and the differences are slight, but when you're doing comparisons among the specimens you have on hand, it pays to look, and if you have some, hypothetically, these are more than one species notions in your head, you would look at the pseudopygidial areas of your two species and see if you notice any differences, because there is quite a bit of variation within the pseudopygidial areas, but so difficult to really describe in most cases. These that you can vaguely see here are relatively narrow. A few species, like we can throw up a lehighensis, for example, and these hairs are not as dense, and they're denser than the hairs on the rest of the segment, and they're flattened, and they're sort of knife-like, plate-like things that are coming down and make a very different presentation. Like I said, though, difficult to really be able to see one nomada and classify it in that way. When we're looking at cressonii kinds of things, what you'll see in the abdomen is it's bigger, the pseudopygidial area is wider and a little bit stronger in presentation. The markings are larger, and usually there's a pair of markings on T5. So 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. This very last one, where the pseudopygidial area will have 2 yellow dots. To just complicate things, there's another white CT species in the males, very easy to tell apart because the antenna is scalloped. But in the female, it's trickier, and it's Nomada denticulata. I think it's denticulata. Why am I thinking it's something else? And denticulata it is denticulata. And denticulata looks almost the same as cressonii, but it has tiny, we may have shown this, tiny little points on the tip of the front coccyx. Just another little subtle world of these things. And then the pitting on the tegula tends to be, in comparison, more dense. So, but we're back to pygmaea. Now let's see if we can zoom in on our friend, the hind tibial setae. This is probably a good place to start in terms of investigating. So here's the hind tibia, hairs all over it. These would be the normal hairs that any bee really would have that are not modified in any particular way. And what we're going to look at is, again, we're going to orient to we may have to shift this a little bit. We're going to orient to the outer face. So the outer, we're kind of looking at the segment, not in perspective. We're looking at it from obliquely rather than, what is that, the perspective shot that's straight on. So in other words, this is the rear over here, this is the front over here. So this is the anterior and the anterior, and I'm not sure. This is the outward facing side. This is the inner facing side. You can see just the differences in terms of hairs, because obviously they're in a different kind of morphological environment. And here is our rim. Our rim is, we're seeing it from the side in terms of the trying to detect the setae on it. But recall that there's always, I'm going to say always, maybe that's possible, there's not. There's always this blunt triangular projection here. It's not really a setae. It's as if a pinch of the integument was pulled out that gives orientation. And usually on the far side, not always, but of the anterior, the outside face of the hind tibia, this is relatively straight. Again, we're looking at it from the side, and there's setae coming down amidst the white hairs. So can I get any higher magnification? I cannot. We're going to shift it to see it from the side here, but I will point out the setae and a couple things. So again, orientation and along here, but there is 1, 2, 3 at least that might not be of the white setae. So what you're looking at is, and these tips seem to be slightly broken off. Usually there's a little bit more length to them, but you can see how it's subtle, right? So we'll also try turning this upside down to see these things a little bit better, but that's all you get, right? There's no red, there's no thick, but there is something different upon close inspection. Aren't Nomada wonderful? So let's change the view here, and we will move the specimen out and try and get a shot. Oh, there we go. Okay, without the wing interfering. That's directly looking at the outer face rather than what we were looking at before, which was an oblique view. So, can I get this in view pretty easily? Okay, we've got, I'm going to leave the light very bright because we're going to move in. But orientation again, so this was the wing that was in the way before there. Here's a triangular corner. This is the line of the anterior face, and there will be setae along that face, which you cannot see very well right now because the light is high and they're very transparent. But they are there and possibly a little broken off. But that's the way it works in this group. They're not going to give you the greatest characters all the time. Okay, so triangle, other side, this is the face. Here's the line across, keeps going out of focus. I'm at my highest magnification. And you can see, normally the CT are clustered over here, but you can see 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 at least. So this right here, see how it's longer? When you have a really nicely performing specimen, usually one, I guess it would be this one, but I'm not 100% sure. It usually has a longest, longer, and it progresses sort of down a scale of lengths. But that's all it is, right? So those little CT semi-transparent ones are what define the group. So they're not red, they're not thick, they're not curved, they're not bold, and they're only a little bit different from the white hairs. So let's pull the specimen again. And so a lot of times it's useful to do this contrasting thing where you're trying as much as possible to get the CT to show up on a dark background. We don't have too dark a background right now. We do have black clay and a black bottom. Let's see if we can do that and see the, I usually play with my finger behind it because I'm looking at it. Again, I'm holding it with my fingers to run it back and forth. It's very variable, like whether that's useful or not. Depends on the lighting and the CT. So the light CT, you want a dark background. The dark CT, you want a light background, which your finger provides. All right, let's see if we can line up this shot here. And we're upside down, so you're looking at the sternites of the abdomens. And we're zooming in. Oh, we may have on this side a darn, oh, do we? Nope, it's in front of the wing. Good. The wing doesn't provide as much contrast as I'd like to see. So recall that you have two tibial spurs, which in the Nomada that I am aware of, we never use for ID. They all seem to be basically the same thing. But keep looking because it may be different. And so what that means, if we're looking at it here, it means the CT, yeah, there's one right there peeking out because we're looking at the wrong side. Let's see if I can get a better shot here on the other side and see what's going on here. A little bit better. When you're doing this with your fingers, of course, you have infinite number of possible ways to hold the specimen. But this is illustrative. So a couple orientations. Here's the big tibial spurs. So we know that we're looking at things from the side now. So the tibial spurs are on the back side, and the front side has the tibial setae that we're interested in. And again, we just go back and it's like there is, if we change the focus, it's sort of sweeping around like this. There's one, there's another. We move the focus a little bit here and there. We just see a few of them. You can see subtly another one right there. Not much. We might find some additional ones to look at. And so that makes it a white setae group. And the group as a whole all has a characteristic that is very similar to that. In other words, you don't use anything within the group more than that it has that present. So there may be subtle differences in that setal pattern, but we've never used it. And the sternites rarely are also used, unlike many other groups. Sternites seem to be not helpful in many cases. Here we can look at the mesepisternum, and this yellow patch is often does yellow running along like a little mustache here along the inner edge of the eye. Actually, this is the outer. It starts underneath or upside down, and it runs along the inner edge. That's present in many different species in its length and presence. Sometimes there's little dots of yellow on top of the head. Not much else to go on with that. Let's, while we've got this here, so you know that in many ways the setal pattern is present in the male and female, but in the male it's much more reduced, which is not great when you're dealing with white setae patterns. But it's still there. Here, we're going to pull out a lovely dark male. So as you can recall, we often say that, well, some males are dark and some are yellow, and they appear to be exactly the same species, at least CO1 molecule wise. So let's see if I can do this here. And we'll bring the magnification back down and try and find a specimen. I've got it off screen too far. There we go. Okay, so you can see, even though it's not in focus, quite a different color pattern. This is, again, why it's been sometimes tricky to tell. This is upside down, but to tell males from females. So this is that same group. And here we have these very bold yellow markings on here. And the integument is very dark throughout. And other times it can be very red. So a distraction and interesting at the same time. Now, hind tibia, this is a male. You can pull this down. You can see a little bit of refocusing. Should be able to see a notch pygidium. You can see, even though the light's strong, here's the notch right there and up, and you're seeing it through a big glob of hairs. But let's move in now to behind tibia. And I think we can see, at least I saw it when I was looking in the other microscope, the long setae. In fact, they seem to be a little bit better defined than the other one in a way. So here is, and this is actually interesting. And it's as I remember, but I only doing these classes do you actually think sometimes in terms of comparisons. So here we're upside down, right? So there's a tibial spurs. That's the inside half of the tibia. And here is our little notch, I believe, right here, or a little pulled out projection right on the front there. And then here are a series of, so here's the standard little forest of white hairs that comes with, so to speak, most bees. And then here are these setae. So a little stiffer, a little longer, never, as far as I know, never branched and slightly sturdier. In this case, they also project out, thank goodness, so we can see them too. But you can see clear, transparent, nothing much to them. And
Could you
thin.
speak to toward the left, closer to the tibial spur? We can
Mhm.
see a couple of things that might be mistaken for CT, these reddish lines
Mhm.
right there.
Yeah, sure. And on Nomada, you can see, like, for example, there's a bunch of things going on, and maybe we have focused too much on just these CT, and there may be more that could be used for IDs. So this is where the future lies, perhaps. But you can see, like here, are these CT that are here? First of all, are they even CT? I think they are. You're right. And if you look over here, here's some darker red things. And then often, I'm going to move the focus down the tibia, And sometimes, although it doesn't seem to be very much here, sometimes within the body of the tibia are more CT. So big, bold red CT. I have not seen that used in any kind of taxonomy, nor have I noticed anything associated with those, which does not at all mean that those aren't useful or clarifying. It's just like there's been no one talking about those. So much still to do. So yeah, these are kind of places to play around. When after you look at millions and millions of the same thing, you begin to explore some of these things as you go through and look for like something different that catches your eye. So that was a good observation to see that. And I just don't know if that little row right there is meaningful or not, but it could be. All right. So I think we are done with pygmaea, unless there's any other particular questions for that group. You can see again the male here, very different looking in there. It's true of most of the, I'm going to spin the, so you can see the face. Most
I think
Nomada.
our question is that you did go off on a explanation of like the white
Uh,
CT group contains other groups, but did
yeah,
you give us a summary of who to expect in this group, at least the more common ones? Because you
right.
did, I think, say that these are a particularly common spring group that you will encounter.
Okay, good. So and hopefully I have
While it is a group, right? If
examples.
we have pictures and species
Yeah.
on Discover Life, it can be helpful to look at those photos for more explanations,
Well,
even
hopefully,
if we're putting in our databases as group.
yeah, they're all relatively common. So I basically have divided into the white CT group. I'm using group probably all too often here. The subgroup that is Pygmaea subgroup of the white CT group. And then there's the Cressonii subgroup in my parlance. Again, realizing that these are uh, almost certainly composites of several species. And then the last one is what I call the sayi illinoensis group. And I'm going to see if I have any. See, this is the problem of not having your collection here. And I don't see any of the. I mean, look, let's see if I have at least Cressonii.
And maybe like bullet points for um those jumps. Like
Yeah,
we talked about sometimes with Mike in subgenus or groups that he's identified.
sorry, say it again.
If you have any bullets for like what gets you to those, like the white CT group, and you jump to the pygmy subgroup, due to X, and the cressonii subgroup due to Y, etc.
Okay. It turns out I have at least some specimens of cressonii group, subgroup, and illinoensis sayi subgroup. So first of all, the whole notion of what are, I think we talked about this early on, of the whole notion of what are subgenera is super murky, and we at this point don't use it, although there's lots of names running around. And Catherine maybe in her revisions upcoming, maybe revising and stabilizing some of those names for subgenera. But for us right now, we're largely ignoring that. And we're using things that just talk about groups of species that have similar characteristics. So right now, the white setae, not probably a subgenus. It's probably in, if it was a subgenus, it'd probably be in there with bidentate species and a couple others. But they all have this white setae characteristic. So we're looking at the pygmaea and the larger. So we'll talk about cressonii. So in comparison to pygmaea, to have those bullet points, it's larger, marked more, and a bit more robust, and a little bit larger on the pseudopygidial area, and often hairier on the lateral sides, in other words, on the pleura. Okay, I've got males here, which we can talk about. And also, I should say, pygmaea and cressonii, but particularly cressonii, they have robust, let's call it, mandibles. And I'll show that on one of these. And the sayi illinoensis group are, in my mind, most clearly differentiated by, oh, these are all males. Maybe not that one. By the thinness and relatively in comparison, their relative thinness of the, yeah, we have a female, what do you know? Of the mandibles. And a few other things, but mostly it's that thinness that breaks them out in my parlance. Okay, so I've got a cressonii here, and a female. We have males too. And let's look at the female. When we put this here, you'll see that we're going to look at the abdomen first. The base color is almost exactly the same in all of these. In the females, a darkish red and with yellow maculations and a moderate amount of black interspersed. So if we look here, but that's very variable, and maybe even within a species. I'm going to drop the light on this. And if it lets me, there we go. Let's bring it down to 90. There we go. Nice. Take this back up. So this thing, this cressonii subgroup thing, you can see has this base of this darker red, and then there's blacks in there in different places. Here it's sort of showing up a degree of hairierness. The sides would have more hair too. And when we look at the abdomen in particular, we see more yellow. So here we have a yellow on T2, where again maculations start in Nomada. We see that the individual maculations on the sides have expanded and are moving towards each other. This is just light here, but you can see they're much bigger than the small dots. The T3 in all Nomada are all a little bit less large. I believe they're there. I might have to move the specimen to see that in particular. And sometimes retractions of the segments prevent you from seeing all the maculations. You can see, for example, On T4 here, there is a central maculation right there. And here on T5, you have a set, and that wasn't there, and this wasn't here. And here are maculations hiding under T3 that are on the lateral side to some extent. There's enough translucence in the rims of the tergites that often, like you can see that this goes up and around like that just by looking right through the integument. And these appear to be spots on T3 on there. Again, wouldn't it be lovely if that's would be the difference and it would be very clear and you could say, oh, if it has this pattern, it's that species. But right now, there's enough variation in these things that we're not sure if that where the boundaries are. This pseudopygidial area is maybe it's not so much larger, but it just presents differently than the other one. So you may not recall what that was looking like, but it's a little bit thicker and these shapes are a little bit different. But you know how to describe that, I can't give you a good description. I'm going to bump the light up here and I can get this to acknowledge. And we will look at this with more clarity. So the little more little broader, I would say, and thicker and less hair-like. I guess it's not in this dimension, not any wider, but it has a different look. So if we go back now down our scale, we're going to flip the side. We'll just look at white CT because why not? And everything else doesn't differentiate very well. But oh, actually, we'll look at the mandibles because the relative robustness of these mandibles is telling us the difference with the sayi illinoensis group. And so there's nothing to really notice here in absence of a different, just on its own. I just want you to know that that is what a nice robust mandible looks like within the cressonii, and also very similar to pygmaea kind of system. But again, without comparison, how would you know that's any different? This is another problem with the group, which is a lot of knowledge is available when you have a whole series of things to compare rather than one species in which this might be a good shot. One species of Nomada and then trying to move you to a firm decision as to what species it is without a lot of other information. So we're going to see a little bit here, again, in comparison, like the side here of this specimen is relatively hairier. But how would you describe that? That would be definitive when you only had this specimen from pygmaea, because pygmaea does have hair there. It's just not quite as much. And the answer is it would be very difficult. All right, let's find.
While we were on the face characters, we do mention in Discover Life I'm going to get our exact wording. On the labrum, the location of the small nub or projection present along the imaginary line that runs lengthwise down the middle from the top center to bottom center. Would you like to address that characteristic while we talk about the face?
Yes. So I was trying to, I think this is behind a wing here, so this is not going to be a good shot. Could you say that again? And
I can.
I'll try and pay more attention, be more present for you.
All good. Or maybe you give us the feedback that you don't use this a whole lot or use it in a different group. But it says head, labrum, the location of the small nub or projection present
Hmm.
along the imaginary line that runs lengthwise down the middle from top center to bottom center.
Yeah. Oh, you mean as a character, not just a cressonii, I think.
Not just a
Yeah.
cressoni, I think, but I think it's a
Uh,
characteristic we haven't talked about in the last couple
okay.
meetings.
Yeah. There's quite a bit of variation in this labral. I'll show you on here. We'll just load it up right here. There's quite a bit of variation in this labral, small labral projection. It can be at the very bottom, it can be in the middle, it can be 3/4 of the way down, and it could be closer to the top. That and that is useful, but not that useful that I use it that often because other characters co-vary with it. But it is a cool character that is different across the present and mysterious because what is it doing? But you'll see projections on labrums in a lot of different species of bees. What the heck it is for? Like, why do you need that projection? So here's the massive labrum. Conveniently, many nomada run their mandible swords below the level here, and you can see simple, not bidentate. And there's the labral projection right there. And this can go up and often goes down. Often it's parked right down there, but usually it's co-varying with some very obvious other kinds of markings and things. So in the end, I end up not looking at it very often. Again, for the
So
people who like to stare, this might be something to that can be evolved into more distinctions. Yes, Claire?
I was just going to point out, so this is like one of those characters where we have the little green numbers next to them, and a lot of
Mhm.
the ones seem like they've been marked for several, but for 1/3 of the way from the top, we only have four, and it looks
Mm,
like three of them are fairly common. We have
mhm.
Buthenii, lehighensis, and then the pygmaea that you were mentioning earlier. So I would assume that that character goes more broad than that with the rest of the group. But it looks like maybe it's one of those characters that when it's useful, it's really useful, and then otherwise it's everybody's kind of in the middle.
Well, I would say yes to that, but that it is rare. In fact, I can't think of any examples where this labrum projection, this lovely little labrum projection, is a definitive character. And so maybe it's because
Aquilarum is scored only for that, but I'm sure it's not the only thing
which
it's
what is the what's the
Aquilarum.
oh yeah, that's not a species that I have a lot of experience with. It's a Midwestern prairie to the west species, and it's got super obvious other characters, like it's bright white, for example, in terms of its instead of being yellow, so the maculations are not yellow, they're white. And it's got problem. I just don't see it enough to know what my ID string is through the identification process for that species. It's basic, like gets to the Dakotas. Maybe it's in Minnesota. I'm not sure. And someone else could inform me about that. So it's not one I have tons of experience with.
We do have pictures. It looks weird.
Yeah. So there's lots of these kinds of features around, and that could be more useful than we realize if we spent more time looking at them and defining them among species groups and things. But I have to tell you that when I'm doing IDs on Nomada, I'm really not looking at the labral projection very much. Okay, so oh, we can look at a basically upside down B for the cetal patterns again. Maybe. Let's see what we got here. Looks like we may not be in a good position here because I think we're looking at the spur side, the interior side of these things. I can find it.
Oh, I got it. Like the one it's like I really don't put that.
What the heck am I looking at? There is, so here's a hind tibia. Here's a spur. And oh, look at, I can zoom in with my, oh, I didn't know that with my roller. I don't even know what those things are. I don't think those are our friends because I think they're coming out from the interior. Let me look at it under my microscope and get a better view of this. It's possible that it's those mysterious other elements that you identified in that last one. Hmm. Yeah. Trying to think if we have a good shot at this. Oh, let's see. One thing is broken off. Right. This is the, if I bend it this way, we have a wing in the way problem, another one that's broken. But what we'll see is basically the same thing that we saw with the others, but it's useful to see them in more than one species or specimen. Take it back down, find our specimen. That, I think, is going to give us a view. You can see, though, the big yellow spots on the lateral sides of the abdomen a little bit better now. And moving in. There is the tibial spur. Yeah, this one is not as friendly with the visuals on its CT, white CT. I want to say that this is the projection of the triangle, and then the CT, which keep going out of focus, are right here. Not a great look. There's 1, 2, 3 shorter than we saw in the other specimens. And just by playing with the focus, you can see, actually, interestingly, if we look at the integument base, you can see where the CT are, and I don't know how CT versus hairs work, but you can kind of see, can we drill in with the visual again? Ooh, maybe we can. You can see how these CT are coming out of the integument on the rim, and the hairs are to the interior. Very strange magnifications, but you can see one,
Shows up pretty
2,
good for us.
3, 4. Is that working?
Yeah.
To some extent? Okay, good. But again, you can see translucent. This one seems to have a faint hint of pink or red in there, which you do see every once in a while, but not a whole lot different from the hair widths, but they're still there. And certainly not like the big, thick red things we were looking at previously. So, what time do we have, Claire?
We're right up. I was wondering if you wanted to show the less robust mandibles
Yes, I
for a
do.
quick compare.
I
And
do.
what I took note of is that your pygmaea subgroup has robust mandibles and other stuff that I think I missed. Cressonii is the largest, more maculated. The pseudopygidial area is larger, robust, thicker, however you want to use that, hairier sides, mandibles, and that your sayi illinoensis group is delicate mandibles.
Right. They also tend to be smaller, the overall. So the size goes sayi illinoensis, pygmaea, cressonii, and body size, with no clear what the boundaries are not defined well, because I don't feel like measuring them because I feel like the whole thing is a bit of murky, the whole taxonomy. But I can tell that these are definitely different things, let's call them. Oh, there we go. And you can see by the size of the pin here too that this is a smaller specimen by quite a bit. All right, so we're going to, from time perspective, we're going to jump to the mandible. We can get there, walking this thing over. Oops. Oh, wait, do I have this spun up? There we go. I had it artificially bumped up. So it's the kind of thing, again, you would want your more than one, but a lot of times you get all these three in it, or these three subgroups, let's call them, in the same place. But you can kind of think, I think if you have retained what these things look like in your mind, you can see this is a lot thinner and more delicate, usually a little bit longer, but it's less about that, more about the relative width of the mandible in comparison to the body size. So it's just a more delicate mandible. And that would be, I'm going to flip it so we can see it from a slightly different angle, but that's the basics.
Was there anything else you wanted to say about the subgroup characteristics?
Say it about what? Sorry.
Individual subgroup characteristics. You've given us the size rundown, mandible stuff.
Yeah, the sayi, it's got two names instead of one because there's probably more clearly more than one species, but I could not differentiate sayi from illinoensis. And according to Mitchell, and he was pretty much the last person to tackle Nomada in the East. And so these would key out to those species in his key, but several of the others are just not mentioned, like ulsterensis and Townsay, and those are all white CT things, I think. And they're in there, but are they just color variation? I'm not sure. And you can see, like this one, if we flip it over to look at the top, the basic model is pretty darn similar to the others. It's just smaller, thinner mandibles as a good character. Is Catherine here? Is she on today? I think she said she was away, right?
Yeah, she's not available today. And I'm about to turn off the recording, but leave the room open for y'all to continue. Just a moment here.
I'm going to take the light back down.
So when I close out the room, I would really we would love folks to provide input on what they want to see next. It seems like we've kind of wrapped up Nomada here with what Sam has in his collection. It doesn't seem likely that we will be able to get our friends to join us for Andrina for a while. So we were thinking about popping back into that with what we have. But if there are other requests, could also see if Joel is ready to come back for to wrap up Lasioglossum, but we always like requests. It's really helpful to know what you guys need.
Yeah.
And now I need to stop the recording, but the party can keep going. I won't close the room.
Yeah. So you can see, I guess, with this one, the pin is relatively large, so this is a small thing, but there's T2 with the big yellow ones and T3 with smaller and the pins hiding the remainder, but it's pretty much the same format. And if we go in and look at the tibia, we would see white CT again, but from the size slash the mandible, um, delicacy, you can see that that would be my measure of like, okay, this is sayi illinoensis group. And there are these size differences between the three, but that's like the average, right? So a large sayi illinoensis